On a quiet coastal plain in Greece, between low mountains and a shallow blue sea, two armies faced each other under the rising sun. On one side stood the might of the Persian Empire, ruler of lands from modern Iran to Egypt and Turkey. On the other stood a few thousand citizen soldiers from a small city called Athens, backed by a tiny ally, Plataea. The place was called Marathon. The year was 490 BCE. What happened here would help decide whether the Greek cities remained free or became just another province in a vast Eastern empire. This is the story of the Battle of Marathon, how a young democracy gambled everything in a single charge and won one of the most important battles in ancient history. Far to the east, in the royal capital of Persepolis, sat King Darius I of Persia. In the years before Marathon, parts of the Greek world, especially cities on the coast of what is now Turkey, known as Ionia, had rebelled against Persian rule. The Athenians had dared to send ships to help those rebels. The revolt was crushed. The city of Miletus was burned. The Persians restored control. But Darius did not forget that Athens had interfered. Ancient writers tell us that Darius had a servant remind him 3 times a day, "Master, remember the Athenians." Around 490 BCE, he decided it was time to punish them. An expedition was prepared to sail across the Aegean Sea to make examples of Eretria and Athens and to frighten the rest of Greece into submission. 2 commanders, Datis and Artaphernes, led a large Persian fleet westward. They captured islands along the way and famously destroyed the city of Eretria, deporting its population. Then the fleet turned south and approached the coast of Attica, the territory of Athens. They looked for a place where they could land many troops, deploy cavalry, and have room to maneuver. They chose a broad, open plain by the sea. That place was Marathon. News of the Persian landing raced back to Athens. In the Athenian assembly, thousands of citizens gathered on a hill called the Pnyx to decide what to do. There was no king to command them. Policy was decided by debate and vote. Some argued for staying behind the city's walls and preparing for a siege. Others feared that if they did nothing, their allies would lose faith, their slaves and poorer citizens might panic, and the Persians might march inland or sail around and strike Athens directly. One of the leading generals, Miltiades, had once lived under Persian rule. He knew how powerful Persia was, but he also knew their style of fighting. He argued for a bold, risky plan: march the army out of Athens, meet the Persians at Marathon, and attack them there on ground chosen by the Athenians instead of waiting passively. After tense debate, the Athenians agreed. The citizen soldiers, hoplites, began to arm themselves. In homes and workshops across the city, men brought out heavy bronze helmets that covered most of the face, breastplates and greaves for the legs and chest, and large round shields, nearly a meter wide. They checked the long ashwood spears that were the main weapon of the hoplite, and the short iron swords that served as backups in close combat. A small neighboring city, Plataea, decided to stand with Athens. Plataean hoplites marched to join them, a powerful symbol that not all Greek cities would bow to Persia. Before the army set out, priests sacrificed animals and examined the entrails for omens. The signs were favorable enough, and so a few thousand ordinary citizens, farmers, craftsmen, and merchants formed up in tight ranks and marched out of Athens toward Marathon to stand in the path of an empire. The plain of Marathon lay between low hills inland and the sea to the east. One side of the plain was bordered by marshy water and shallow water, dangerous for heavy infantry or cavalry. On the other sides, rocky hills rose up toward the interior of Attica and the roads leading to Athens. Along the shoreline, the Persian camp stretched in neat lines, rows of colorful tents for officers and simpler shelters for common soldiers, stacks of bows, spears, and wicker shields, enclosures for horses, and just beyond the sand, a great fleet of ships anchored in the bay. Persian infantry with light armor and wicker shields, archers with full quivers, and cavalry patrols on the beach presented an image of overwhelming power. Near the foothills to the west, the Greek army took position. They refused to come too close to the Persian cavalry on the open plain, but they also blocked the inland routes that led toward their city. For several days, the two sides watched each other across the field. The Persians waited, perhaps hoping that fear would grow in Athens, that other Greek cities would surrender, or that they would find a chance to embark part of their army, sail around Cape Sunion, and appear suddenly before undefended Athens. The Athenians and Plataeans waited too. They had sent a runner to Sparta to beg for help, but each day that passed reminded them that for now they faced the Persians alone. According to later tradition, the Athenians chose their best long-distance runner, Phidippides, and sent him on a desperate mission to Sparta. He ran something like 240 kilometers over mountains and rough tracks to reach the Spartan city. Arriving exhausted, Phidippides begged the Spartans to march immediately to help face the Persians at Marathon. The Spartans agreed that Athens should be saved, but they were in the middle of a major religious festival, the Carnia. Their law, they said, forbade them from starting a campaign until the next full moon. So Phidippides turned back and ran the long road home with bad news. No Spartan army would arrive in time. Whether every detail of this story is exact or not, the basic reality is clear. When the battle at Marathon finally came, only Athens and Plataea would stand in front of the Persian army. Back at Marathon, tension in the Greek camp grew. The Athenians had 10 elected generals, one from each tribe, and they took turns holding command day by day. Some wanted to wait for the Spartans, others urged an immediate attack. Eventually, the decision came down to Callimachus, the polemarch, a senior military official who held a casting vote. Miltiades argued passionately that delay was dangerous. If they waited too long, he said, fear and dissent could tear Athens apart, or the Persians might march inland or sail around and strike Athens directly. If they attacked now, on favorable ground, their heavy infantry could defeat the lighter-armed Persians. Callimachus sided with Miltiades. The army would attack. Miltiades then arranged the Athenian and Plataean line in a special way. To match the width of the much larger Persian front, he stretched his own line thin. He deliberately weakened the center and reinforced the wings, hoping that the strong flanks could defeat the Persian sides and then turn inward on the center. At dawn on the chosen day, the Greeks prepared to move. Hoplites tightened the straps on their armor, lifted their heavy shields onto their left arms, and formed up shoulder to shoulder in long, dense ranks. Plataeans took their place at one wing. At the signal, the long Greek line began to advance across the plain. At first, they walked in disciplined step, shields overlapping. Then, as they came within range of Persian arrows, the line broke into a run. Ancient accounts say they ran the last stretch, perhaps a kilometer or more, toward the Persian army. Whether that exact distance is right or not, the image remains powerful. Thousands of armored citizens charging down the plain, spears leveled, voices raised in a roar, heading straight for the invaders. On the Persian side, archers hurried into position, drawing bows and loosing volleys of arrows in a dark cloud. Arrows clattered into shields, armor, and earth. Some men fell, but the hoplite armor and the tightly packed formation soaked up much of the damage. The Greek line did not stop. Moments later, the front ranks crashed together.
Bronze-faced shields smashed into wicker shields. Long Greek spears jabbed over the top edge of the shield wall, seeking faces and throats. Persian fighters responded with shorter spears, swords, and daggers. The elegant lines of battle dissolved into a dense, shoving mass of bodies. In the center of the field, the thinner Greek line bent under the weight of the Persian assault. Here, the Athenians and Plataeans were close to being pushed back. But on the wings, where Miltiades had concentrated his strength, the story was different. There, the heavily reinforced Greek flanks slowly drove back the Persians opposite them. Once the wings had gained enough ground, they began to pivot inward. The Greek right wing turned left, the left wing turned right. The Persian center, still pressing forward, suddenly found itself under attack from both sides.
It was a classic double envelopment, the kind of maneuver that would later be made famous by generals like Hannibal, but here used centuries earlier. Caught between strong Greek forces on three sides, with nowhere to go but backward toward the beach, the Persian center crumbled. Men began to break and run. What had been an orderly line became a panicked mass rushing for the safety of the ships. Some Persians threw down their shields to run faster. Others tried to form rear guards to buy time. The Greeks pressed after them, spears and swords flashing, breath burning in their lungs. They drove the Persians all the way back to the shoreline, where the fleet lay at anchor. Down on the beach, the battle turned into a brutal struggle around the Persian ships. Persian marines and archers tried to protect the loading of the vessels, while crews pushed furiously to get the ships off the sand and into deeper water. In the chaos, some ships were captured or burned, others managed to escape. Ancient accounts say the Greeks took 7 Persian ships as trophies. For the great naval power of the age, it was a serious humiliation. But the Persians still had many ships left and many soldiers. Realizing they could not annihilate the entire fleet, the Greeks began to pull back, forming again into more orderly ranks. They had won a clear victory on the field. However, the danger was not entirely over. Persian commanders now had another terrible idea. Leave Marathon, sail quickly around the coast, and attack Athens directly, hoping to reach the city before its army could get back. The Athenians realized this almost at once. They knew they could not afford to sit and celebrate on the battlefield. They had to move. According to later stories, the Athenians marched, or even ran, the roughly 40 kilometers back from Marathon to Athens as fast as they could, still wearing some or all of their heavy armor. One version of the legend says that a runner, sometimes identified with Phidippides, reached Athens ahead of the army, burst into the assembly, gasped, "We have won!" and then collapsed and died from exhaustion. Whether or not that dramatic detail is literally true, the essential fact stands. The Athenians moved with extraordinary speed. They understood that victory at Marathon meant little if the Persians could capture an undefended city behind their backs. So when the Persian fleet finally appeared off the coast near Athens, the invaders saw something they had not expected. The same Athenian army that had just beaten them at Marathon now lined up, ready to defend their city. The opportunity for a quick strike was gone. The Persians turned away and sailed home. The first Persian invasion of mainland Greece had failed. The Greeks had won, but they had paid a price. Ancient sources say the Athenians and their Plataean allies lost 192 men in the battle, a small number compared to the thousands of Persians reported dead, but each of those 192 was a citizen known by name at home. On the field of Marathon, the Athenians built a burial mound, a great earthen tumulus, and placed their fallen warriors within it, honoring them together as they had fought together. They raised a victory trophy on the battlefield, perhaps a stone column decorated with shields and helmets to mark the place where they had turned back the invader. In Athens, sacrifices were made to Athena and other gods in thanks for the victory.
Artists painted and carved hoplites and battles on pottery and stone. Marathon began to live not only as a memory, but as a symbol. In Persia, messengers reported the defeat to King Darius. He was enraged, but he also faced revolts and challenges in other parts of his empire. Plans for a second, far larger invasion of Greece were begun, but Darius died before he could lead it. That task would pass to his son, Xerxes, and lead to later even more famous battles at Thermopylae, Salamis, and Plataea. For Athens, Marathon became a foundational story. It proved to many Athenians that free citizens fighting for their own land and laws could defeat a much larger army commanded by a distant king. It gave confidence to their democracy and pride to their culture. Today, the plain of Marathon is quiet again. Fields, roads, and villages cover the ground where arrows once darkened the sky. Archaeologists have dug into the burial mound, studied the soil in the marshes, and found arrowheads, pieces of armor, and pottery that help confirm the ancient accounts. Museums near Marathon and in Athens display these artifacts: corroded bronze arrowheads, fragments of shields, and inscriptions carved to honor the dead of Marathon. Modern historians piece together the story by comparing Herodotus and other ancient writers with physical evidence and the shape of the land. They debate exact numbers and distances, but most agree on the broad outline. A smaller force of heavily armored citizen soldiers defeated a larger, more varied army by choosing their ground carefully, using smart tactics, and fighting with determination. And the word marathon itself has taken a new life. The modern long-distance race of about 42 kilometers traces its inspiration to the distance between Marathon and Athens and to the legendary run that followed the battle. Every time runners around the world line up for a marathon today, they echo in a symbolic way the strain and urgency of that ancient dash to save a city. The Battle of Marathon was not the end of the struggle between Greece and Persia. It was, in many ways, just the beginning. Persia would return under Xerxes with a massive army and navy. Greece would face terrifying odds at Thermopylae and then win decisive victories at sea and on land. But Marathon was the first great signal that the Persians could be beaten in open battle, that a young democracy could stand against an empire, that careful planning and citizen courage could defeat numbers and reputation. On a strip of land between mountains and sea, Athens won more than just a fight. It won the confidence to grow into a cultural and political force whose ideas about debate, citizenship, and freedom still echo today. That was Marathon, 490 BCE, a single day, a single battle, and a long run that helped shape the future of the Western world.